Hornbill. Along with the explanation, we'll be doing the literary devices and a few important questions. A photograph brings memories, some refreshing, some painful, but they're always a treasure. Now, suppose you have this old photograph of yours. So, looking at the photograph, if you want to describe this photograph to someone, how will you describe it? So, maybe you'll say, "Oh, this. I was 6 years old when this photograph was taken. There was a park near my house, and I used to play in that park every day. That behind you can see, that was my favorite swing. And you can see my friends Rohan, Samira, and Amit. I remember it was my birthday." So, with one photograph, you can describe so many things, so many nostalgic memories and moments they come to your mind. So, something like that happens with a poet when she looks at an old photograph of his mother. So, let's get started. So, this is the first stanza. The cardboard shows me how it was when the two girl cousins went paddling, each one holding one of my mother's hands, and she, the big girl, some 12 years or so. So, in the picture, you can see there are three girls. So, one is the mother of the poet, and other two are the two girl cousins of the mother of the poet. And paddling means walk by the seashore. So let's see the explanation. So the poet has an old picture of her mother which is mounted on a cardboard. It is of the time when her mother went paddling with two of her girl cousins. So she says that picture shows her mother with two of her cousins holding each other's hands. Her mother in the middle is about 12 years old and the oldest among the three. So we can see in the picture, so in the middle, this is the mother of the poet and she is the oldest. She is some 12 years old. So the cardboard word, it signifies the era the poet is referring to, when photographs they were developed and they were preserved in an album or they were framed as memory. So it wasn't a digital era like today's. So it was an era when photographs they were developed and they were preserved in an album. And the word shows here, it is being used as a verb which means to reveal, to convey, to communicate, to indicate. So the poet is just not looking at the picture. The picture is revealing the past to her. So in this sense, the cardboard shows here it is personified. So we'll be talking about it later when we'll be doing literary devices. The poet remembers her mother holding her old picture in her hand. She creates a beautiful image of the girls while describing them. As she does so, she is being nostalgic and remembers the fun-filled days of her mother. So maybe some time ago, the mother of the poet had described that picture to the poet. So now the poet holding that picture remembers those times and remembers how the mother described that picture to her. Now the next stanza. All three stood still to smile through their hair at the uncle with a camera. A sweet face, my mother's, that was before I was born. And the sea, which appears to have changed less, washed their terribly transient feet. So you can see the three girls standing and uncle was taking their picture. So they were posing in front of the camera. So all three stood still to smile through their hair. Let's do the explanation. And here transient, it means short term or temporary. So all three in the picture, they were standing still, smiling through their hair. Now smiling through the hair, it means maybe it was a windy day. So on the beach, and therefore their hair, they were covered their face. So maybe half of the face was covered by their hair, so they were smiling through their hair. At the uncle who was clicking their photograph. She finds her mother to be a beautiful girl with a sweet face, and that was the time before the poet was born. So that picture was taken when the poet had not come into the life of her mother, so before the poet was born. The poet then points at the sea behind the girls, which appears not to have changed much during these years. So, during all these years, the sea has not changed much, but the girls they have grown up. So, the sea washed their terribly transient feet. So, this terribly transient feet explanation I'll be doing later, it is important. So, the sea washed their terribly transient feet. Transient, we have done the meaning, it means short lived or temporary. So let's read the analysis. The three girls happily posed for the photograph that was clicked by their uncle. The poet then describes the youthful face of her mother as sweet, pointing at her being tender and soft. The poet tries to capture the innocence of those days, the childhood days of her mother, the days when she was not born, when she had not come into the life of a mother. So, days when she was not born, she was not in the life of the mother, but how she can describe those days because the mother had given that description to her about that photograph. So, thus it points at the distance of years the poet is trying to convey to the readers. So, the poet is pointing at the distance. She's talking about something that has happened in the childhood of the mother, and the mother had described about that thing later when she was born. So the poet then points at the immortality of the sea as compared to the transient life of human beings. So when the poet says terribly transient feat, the poet is actually pointing at the mortality, transient nature of human beings and immortality of the sea. That is why the poet says that sea hasn't changed much, because nature is immortal. So even after so many years, sea appears to be unchanged. But the girls in the picture, they are not the same. They have grown older. So next, the poet says, some 20, 30 years later, she would laugh at the snapshot. See Betty and Dolly, she would say, and look how they dressed us for the beach, the sea holiday. So the poet remembers that almost 20 to 30 years later, her mother would laugh looking at the photograph while talking to her about it. So now, 20 to 30 years later, after the photograph was taken, the mother pointed out how they were dressed for the sea, for the picnic at the beach, and the poet also remembers how amusingly her mother used to show her the way their parents dressed them for the beach. So, amusingly, laughingly. The mother would laugh at the way they were dressed at that time. So, mother at that time was 12 years old, and 20 to 30 years later, the mother was describing that picture to her daughter. So the poet talks about a past event when her mother had described that photograph to her. So, laughing at the way they were dressed. Looking at the photograph, the mother fondly remembered her childhood days, and the poet remembers how her mother would laugh while sharing the past memories with her. So, mother would laugh sharing those memories, the carefree memories of her childhood. The sea holiday was her past, mine is her laughter. Both rhyme with labored ease of loss. Now, this is important. Rye actually means ironic or mocking, but here, of a person's face or features, it means disappointment and disgust. So when the poet says, with a heavy heart, the poet then says that the sea holiday of her mother was her past, and for her, her mother's laughter was past. Now, when the poet says, was her past, mine is her laughter. So here we come to know that the poet is talking about her mother's death. Her mother is not anymore in his life. So she misses her mother badly. Looking at the picture, the mother would think about those lighter moments which cannot be lived again. So now, looking at that picture which the mother had described to her, now she's thinking about those lighter moments which cannot be lived again. The poet also is lost in the past memories of her mother. The moments spent with her cannot be lived again. So there are two pasts the poet is talking about. One is the mother's past, you can see here. So one is the mother's past, one is the mother's laughter. Now at this point, the poet is trying to accept that her mother is not with her anymore. And remembering and holding that picture in her hand, the poet is thinking about mother's laughter that had happened almost 12 years back, because in the next stanza we'll be reading that it's almost 12 years that the poet's mother had passed away. So she's talking about her mother's laughter. Maybe 12 years ago, the mother, when was describing that picture to her. So now she's remembering her laughter. She's missing her laughter. And mother actually was talking about something that had happened in her past, in her childhood days. So the poet is talking about two pasts. So the poet also is lost in the past memories of her mother. The moments spent with her cannot be lived again. It was painful for both to forget the past and move on, but loss has to be accepted. Now, when mother talked about her past, so mother was also cherishing those memories, and mother also wanted to relive her childhood again, but that was not possible. And the poet also cannot relive these moments spent with her mother. She cannot relive when mother was describing that photograph to her and laughing. So she misses the laughter of her mother too. So that is why it was painful for both to forget the past and move on. But loss has to be accepted. Though struggles and difficult times are hard to overcome, they have to be taken in one stride. So that is why when the poet says, both rye with the labored ease of loss. So right, disappointed. So both they were disappointed that they cannot relive their past again. So labored ease of loss means that it is hard to accept the reality, but one has to move on. Only then life will become easy. So labored ease of loss. So this is the meaning of the line. Then the poet says, now she's been dead nearly as many years as that girl, and of this circumstance there is nothing to say at all. It's silence silences. So now, here in the first line, we come to know that the poet here says that it has been about 12 years since her mother died. When the poet says nearly as many years as that girl lived. So in that photograph, the girl was 12 years old. So that is why it's been about 12 years since her mother died, the same number of years as her mother had lived when that picture was clicked. So, talking about the present, the poet is not able to express her pain at the death of her mother. So, and of this circumstance. So, this circumstances, the circumstances that is created after the death of the mother. So, poet says that she is not able to express her pain at the death of the mother. It had taken a huge effect on her. So, since the poet cannot describe it in words, the poet is rendered speechless. A silence has been created around the poet because of the absence of her mother, and that has left her speechless. So it's silence silences. Silence has been created because of the death of the poet's mother, and it has rendered the poet speechless. So this is the explanation. Now we come on to the literary devices. So let's describe the literary devices quickly. So first one is personification. So as I already told you, personification here, when the poet writes, the cardboard shows. So it is a quality of a person to show something to someone. So therefore, the cardboard shows, it is personification. And second literary device is illusion. Now, illusion is a literary device. It is a reference, typically brief, to a person, place, thing, event, or other literary work with which the reader is presumably familiar. So it is when we refer to something, maybe a person, a place, or a thing, we point out at something to another literary work with which the reader is familiar with, to give him an idea what the poet or what the writer is talking about. For example, in 10th standard, you did the poem Amanda. In that also there was a delusion when Amanda, or when the poet says that I am Rapunzel. So Rapunzel, it is another literary work, it is a work of fiction, a fairy tale. So when Amanda is saying, I am Rapunzel, so she is actually talking about the beautiful girl with long hair that was captured in the tower. So we automatically come to know, we automatically relate to the condition of Amanda. So that is illusion. So here, when the poet refers to cardboard, the cardboard shows. So the poet is talking about the photograph of an era which was not digital. And also, it points to cardboard that cannot stay forever. Again, it is something that will be destroyed. So that is why the word cardboard is an illusion. Then we come to the next literary device, that is alliteration. So alliteration here we find in my mother, that is alliteration. Then stood still to smile. So this is again alliteration. And we have another alliteration here when the poet says here, terribly transient. So this is alliteration. Then we come to another literary device, enjambment. So enjambment is when the Lines, they run into the next line. That is, a thought of a previous line, it is carried forward to the next line without a punctuation mark at the end. So when this line, the cardboard shows me how it was when the two girl cousins went paddling. So this line is running into the next line. So this is enjambment. So we also have enjambment here. And she, the big girl, some 12 years or so, from here to here, all three stood still to smile through the hair, and then from here to here. Again, it is enjambment. Now, next literary device is transferred epithet. Now, transferred epithet, it is a figure of speech in which a modifier which is usually an adjective, it qualifies a noun other than the person or a thing it is actually describing. So here, when we have terribly transient feet here, so here the word transient, it is actually describing human life. It is actually describing the word there here, there, which is mentioning the girls. So girls who are human beings. So transient is actually referring to humans. So it is referring to humans. So I'm not actually able to write here like this, but it is referring to humans. I'm sorry about this. So this is epithet. Now after that we have another literary device that is called synecdoche. Now synecdoche is a figure of speech in which a part of something is used to signify the whole or vice versa. Now here part of something, part of human body, here feet, it is actually referring to the whole person. It is not only referring to feet. It is not that out of the whole human body only feet are transient. It is the whole human being, whole body that is transient. So therefore it is literary device of synecdoche. Now we move on to the next. Now these are the literary devices in the following lines. Now alliteration again. So here we have alliteration. When the poet says, let's read and we'll find the alliteration is, see Betty and Dolly, she would say, and look how they dressed us for the beach. The sea holiday was a past, mine is a laughter, both wry with labored ease of loss. Now she's been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived, and of this circumstance there's nothing to say at all. It's silence, silences. So here we have alliteration. Then we have oxymoron. Now, oxymoron, we have this as oxymoron, which means a figure of speech pairing two words together that are opposing or contradictory. So labor means hard work, and ease means easy, easy going. So these are contradictory words paired together. So therefore this is oxymoron. And then again we have enjambment. So here we can see this is running into the next stanza, sorry, next line. Again, this is running into the next, this is running into the next, then again this is running into the next. So that is why all these are examples of enjambment. So these are the literary devices. Next, tone of the poem. Now the tone of the poem is nostalgic and happy in the beginning. So nostalgic as the poet is looking at the photograph and is remembering the cheerful and happy days when the poet describes an old photograph of her mother's youthful days. Then towards the end, the tone, it becomes sad. Now the poet talks about the transient nature of human life. She is grief-stricken, as the reader can also perceive it from the tone that is too sorrowful. So towards the end, it becomes sorrowful. The rhyme of the whole poem, it is free verse. It is written in free verse. There's no as such rhyme in the poem. Now, important lines, explanation of the important lines, these can come as questions. There is nothing to say at all. It's silence, silences. So let's explain these lines. The death of the poet's mother has been very painful for her. She missed her laughter and her presence around her. This has silenced everything around her and rendered her speechless. She cannot describe this pain in words. So there's nothing to say. Now the poet says that now that the mother is no more with her, so there's nothing to say at all. Everything has been silenced around her, and because of that silence, she too has been rendered speechless. She cannot describe this pain in words. So, this is the meaning of these lines. Now, next, what does this circumstance refer to? This circumstance refers to the death of her mother and the void that is created in her life due to that. Because of this, everything has been silenced around her. When the sea holiday was her past, mine is her laughter. The poet's mother had laughingly shared her memories with the poet about the photograph which was taken around 20 or 30 years ago while she was on a sea holiday with her two cousins. Those youthful days of her mother were her past. But 12 years after the death of her mother, the laughter of her mother has become a thing of past for her. So, as I already explained, the poet is talking about two pasts. One is the past of the mother when she describes the photograph and she is describing a past event in her life that had happened in her childhood. So, that is one past. And the other past is when the poet says, so, 12 years after the death of the mother, the laughter of her mother, that has become a thing of past for her. When the poet is describing and poet is cherishing her mother's laughter when she described that photograph to her. So, she is talking about two pasts. Washed their terribly transient feet. So, as I told you, I'll be explaining this later. So, the eternal sea waves washed the feet of the girls as they were walking on its shore. So, eternal sea. Sea is immortal. So, these waves, they were washing the feet of the girls as they were walking on its shore. So, here the poet contrasts the permanence of sea with impermanence, that is, mortality of human life. With time, the girls grew up, but the sea remained unchanged. So the girls were there during their childhood. Sea remained the same, but girls, they grew up and they died one day. Both ride with a labored ease of loss. Time has taken its toll both on the poet and her mother. With time, the mother had aged. Though she cherished her childhood memories, but the loss of her youthful days was painful for her. The poet also suffered from an agonizing loss with the death of her mother. So both they were suffering from loss. The mother was suffering from the loss of her youthful days. She wanted to relive those days, but that was not possible. And the poet was suffering from the agonizing loss of the death of the mother. The poet also wanted to relive those moments when her mother was present, and that is also not possible. So both were disappointed. So, right, both were disappointed because the past cannot be relived. Thus, the poet has learned to bear the loss with time and move on. So, thus, the poet has learned to move on because those things cannot happen again. Now, next is what is the significance of the last two lines in the poem? The poet does not talk about her mother's death directly. Does she seem to be grieving? So, these are the last two lines. The last two lines convey that the poet has suffered from a deep impact due to the death of her mother. She is rendered speechless. Talking about her death would be more agonizing for her. Thus, she refrains from talking about it and as she is still grieving and trying to cope up with her loss. She rather chooses a happy memory of her mother in her effort to bear the loss and move on. So this question is significance of these lines. Now previously I have explained what is the meaning of these lines. So if it comes what these lines signify, then these lines they convey that the poet has suffered from a deep impact due to the death of her mother. So the poet is rendered speechless. And talking about the death, it would be more agonizing for her because talking about her death would remind her of her mother. So, thus, what the poet does not directly talk about the death of the mother in the poem, that how the mother died, whether the mother was sick or she met with an accident or something else happened with the mother. She does not talk about that. So she is trying to cope up with the loss, and to do that, she rather chooses a happy memory of her mother. She cherishes those moments spent with her mother. So she chooses a happy memory of her mother in her effort to bear the loss and move on. Now we come to the theme. Now rest of the questions they you can answer from the explanation only because I have given a detailed explanation of the poem. So these were the main questions. Now theme. The poem A Photograph by Shirley Tolson revolves around the universal theme of losing a loved one. So this is the main theme. Though a harsh reality, it is hard to accept. In the poem, the poet recounts a few nostalgic moments that she shared with her mother. A photograph in the hand of the poet brings back the memories of happy days, the happy days of her mother's childhood, and her joyful days with her mother. So, with a photograph in the hand, again the poet is reminded of two things. One is the happy days of her mother's childhood and her joyful days spent with her mother. When the mother described that photograph to the poet. So those lighter moments, those laughing moments. So she remembers two things. So it is difficult for the poet to accept that her mother is not with her anymore. Though the happy moments and memories they are imprinted on the cardboard, the fact that these cannot be relived is overwhelming for the poet. The mortality of human beings is the truth, and the loss of our loved ones has to be accepted because, in front of this certainty, there's nothing to say at all. It's silence silences. So, this is the theme. The reality that a death will come, it has to be accepted. Now, the central idea. The poem A Photograph deals with loss and separation by creating a contrast between the immortality of nature and mortality of humans. With time, the poet's mother, who was 12 years old when the photograph was taken, grew up and passed away one day. But the sea in the background of the photograph didn't change much. It is agonizing for the poet to believe that her mother is no more with her. Loss is always painful and hard to bear. Though the poet is rendered speechless because of the void created, the loss has to be accepted. So, holding the favorite photograph of her mother, she cherishes her mother's laughter and tries to cope up with it. So, this is the central idea, the poem. In brief, it describes what the poem is about. Now, if you read the central idea carefully, you'll find there are three phases described in the poem. The first phase is when the mother was 12 years old, when that photograph was taken, the childhood of the mother, the carefree days of the mother. After that, the second phase is when the mother grew up. She was in her middle age, and at that time, looking back at that photograph, she was remembering her carefree childhood days and she wanted to relive those days. So, that is the second phase. And third phase is when the poet is grieving about the mother who has passed away. So, the poet talks about three phases in this poem. So, image credits are these, and that's all for today. So, I hope that you've understood this poem clearly. All the literary devices are clear, and important questions are also clear. So, do subscribe to my channel and give it a thumbs up so that I can keep on uploading such videos. Bye for now, and happy watching.